Yeah, just to share something which I said over Shabbos that I mentioned to you last week. One of my grandchildren asked me a question. The Gemara is a married grandchild. The Gemara Menach tells us a story that David HaMelech, that when he was in the bathhouse, he realized he was disconnected from all mitzvahs. Because in the bathhouse, you're not permitted to study Torah, you're naked, you're not wearing tzitzis. And he felt he was detached from mitzvahs. And then when he saw his circumcision, he immediately says, I rejoice over Imrasecha, like I've come upon great spoils of war. That's what David says. And this pasuk we say many times. We say by Tkiyah Shofar, Kras Soton, the sin for Soton is that pasuk of Sosnoch Imrasecha Kimotzi Shalorov by Tkiyah Shofar on Rosh Hashanah. I rejoice over your dictates as if I've come upon Shalorov, great spoils. So the question is asked. We know David says regarding Torah, Tovli Torah Spicho, Mi'alfi Zov Chesef, that Torah of your mouth is good, like thousands of talents of gold and silver. Shlomo Melech refers to the Torah, the equivalent of diamonds or pearls. And over here, and we find the Shlomo refers to Yerushalayim as matmonim, treasure. And here, David, when he speaks about the circumcision, he says, Kamotzi Sholorov, as if I've come upon great booty, like spoils of war. Why does he use that term? That's the question. I mentioned it last week a little bit. First thing that came to mind was this. We'd once mentioned the name of the Orach Chaim HaKodesh. In Parshas Tazria, the Torah tells us, Isha ki Tazria v'yolda zocher, woman who conceives a male, it says, B'yom hashmini sara loso. On the 8th day, you circumcise the flesh of his foreskin. You remove the foreskin. The mitzvah Bila is mentioned. So there, the Orach Chaim HaKodesh explains that, and I've mentioned this many times, that the Zohar says that when Hashem created Adam, he did not have a foreskin. The foreskin is a covering, and it's an expression of the Ra, of the evil of the Eitz Hadas. Just as evil is a distortion of truth, it covers and it blocks one from understanding, seeing things correctly. The foreskin is a covering. So it covers the reproductive organ of the Jew, of the human being. But before the Chet of Adam Rishon, before he ate of the Eitz Hadas, he did not have that covering. The mitzvah of Mila is to remove that. So he explains over there, the Mishnah tells us that if a person makes a neder, that he will not allow people who are reilim, people who are uncircumcised, to benefit from him. Even an Arab who's circumcised, who's called Arvi Mol, is not permitted to benefit from him. Why? Because the Mishnah quotes a pasuk that Arabs are called, or non-Jews, even the circumcised, they're called Arli Lev. They have orla, they have coverings on their hearts. Even though externally the foreskin will be removed, but the classification is Arli Lev. They have coverings, the foreskins on their heart. That's the Mishnah. So he explains over there that Avram Avinu, when was he circumcised? When was he given the mitzvah of Milah? At the age of 99. Before, when he was told that he's going to have a child, Yitzchak was going to be conceived. So he explains that Avram Avinu was able to develop the level within himself of Kedusha and spirituality that when he removed the outer foreskin, it affected the covering of his heart, and it made a difference. It was a tikkun in the Chet of Adam Rishon. It was a correction in the Chet of Adam Rishon. And as a result of that, he is not the same person any longer. Meaning, until then, all pathways to Kedusha were blocked. When you remove that impediment, Now he removed the Orlas Halev. It was a tikkun. It was a correction of the Chet of Adam Rishon. Not fully, we're still influenced by that, but it had a very significant effect to open many pathways that we have relevance to have a relation with Hashem. That's the Orach Chaim HaKodesh. The non-Jew, when he removes it, because since his essence, the innate essence of the non-Jew is not that, he's fully affected by the Chet of Adam Rishon. The removal of the outer foreskin is purely cosmetic. It does not affect the inner, the neshama of the non-Jew, but the Jew's neshama is affected, and that's Avram Avinu. That was his level of accomplishment by the age of 99. Therefore, so for the man, the tikkun was the milah, and for the woman, the laws of menstruation, that every month she menstruates and she has to keep the laws of spirit, family purity. That's a tikkun for Chava, what she had done when she had given Deitz Hadas for Adam to eat. This is the Orach Chaim over there in Parshas Tazria. Now, if you remember, the Orach Chaim HaKodesh in Parshas Kiseitze, which we're going to have not too far off, had cited the Zohar that the time of Adam Arisha, when he ate of Deitz Hadas, Sodom had taken many special souls captive. One of the souls that were taken captive, which were one of the most special neshamos, was the soul of Rus HaMoaviyah, Rus. And only at that particular time in history was that soul released for conversion. And the whole concept of Eshish Vastor, when they go to World War, the tzaddikim, these people, and all of a sudden they're attracted to a non-Jewish woman, even if she's ugly. What's the attraction? He said the attraction is because that's the question. They have to run the test that if they're attracted to maybe one of these special souls, and because of these special souls, that's the attraction that the soldier has to this non-Jewish woman. And you go through this process to determine, is he interested, not interested in her? This is what it's about. That's the Orach Chaim HaKodesh over there. So what happened? When Satan caused Adam to eat of Deitz Hadas, what did he do? He took his neshama and he took a captive. Adam, after eating of Deitz Hadas, his classification was forfeited. Originally, he was Adam. Adam, as we said, is advancing in spirituality. At that moment, he became totally shut down. There's the concept of spiritual advancement and no relevance to Adam. Avram Avinu, who's the founding patriarch of Klal Yisrael, we became Adam at Sinai. Atem kruim Adam, heim lo kruim Adam. We're Adam, they're not Adam. We have relevance to advance because what Avram Avinu had done regarding the 10 tests and so on and so forth, he was able to achieve within himself, and that's why he was given the gift of Milah, and that's what's called Bris Kodesh. It's the holy covenant with Hashem. This Bris Kodesh Sab Serenu. It's the covenant which is engraved in our flesh. Therefore, we're able to advance and impact our neshamas. That's the concept. So it comes out like this. We became Adam. But why do we have relevance to Adam? Why can we advance? The reason why we can advance is because we were given the gift of Milah, that when you take off that foreskin, you regain, you can recapture what originally was taken from us. So the Milah allows us to regain, this is the spoils of war, this is the booty we're taking. All our relevance to Kedusha, to Torah, is the mitzvah of Milah. Without that, we have no relevance to Torah. We have no relevance to have a relation with God. Therefore, we remove it, and we're regaining, recapturing what's rightfully ours, which was part of the intent of the Bria, Bishul Torah Shenikras Reishis. The world was created for the sake of Torah, that should be the medium to advance us to have a relation with Hashem. Satan blocked that. Therefore, Adam cannot have a relation with Hashem or any non-Jew. However, Avram Avinu, because he was able to achieve what he achieved, therefore, when David saw the foreskin, he says, this is the spoils of war. So this is what I just advance it a little further. We find Parshas Lech Lecha, Hashem says to Avram Avinu, Lech Lecha mi'artzcha mi'aretcha, leave the land, so on and so forth. Vavorecha, I will bless you. But God l'shmecha, and I will make your name great. You'll have renown, so and so. Then it concludes v'yeh brocha, and you will be a blessing. So Rashi over there cites the Midrash. In Shemon Esrei, they're going to say Elokei Avram. They're going to say Elokei Yitzchok, and then say Elokei Yaakov. However, maybe when you conclude the first bracha in Shemon Esrei, you conclude Mogen Avram Yitzchok Yaakov. The bracha, no, b'chol chosmin. We're going to conclude Mogen Avram. You're going to be the conclusion, not the others are not going to be mentioned. So the way I always understood it was, because I once mentioned him, Reb Meir Simcha Vinsk, he cites Chazal, based on a pasuk, that the Avos HaKadoshim, Avram is classified as Novo. Yitzchak and Yaakov are referred to as Chachomim. What's the difference between a Novo and a Chacham? A Chacham is a person who possesses knowledge. A Novo is Motzi Dover, Mevid Dover. You're able to extract something from something else. Avram, when he looked at this world, he was able to come upon the truth, to see that this world has a creator. That was it. He was able to delve and extrapolate from this, there's a creator. Yitzchak and Yaakov did not have that ability. So Yitzchak and Yaakov only, even though Yaakov surpassed Avram, that's only because Avram already had introduced monotheism into the world. Without Avram, it wouldn't have happened. So that's what I always understood. He's Mogen Avram. He's Mogen Avram because if not for Avram, there wouldn't have been a Yitzchak and a Yaakov. They wouldn't have come upon it themselves. However, with this, it's like this. It's Mogen Avram. Why do we have a mitzvah of Milah? We only have mitzvah of Milah because Avram Avinu was able to achieve within himself a degree of advancement, spiritually speaking, that now removal of the foreskin, which is the outer covering, impacts on his neshama. Now he has relevance. All the pathways of Kedusha have been reopened. Therefore, as a result of that, now the objective of the world, which is Torah, now could be achieved. That's B'chol Chosman. Because why was Yaakov Ishtam Yoshev V'Holim? Not only did he believe in God, not only did he agree to allow to be himself sacrificed to Hashem, the core, the essence of objective of creation, it's only due to Avram Avinu. Because Avram Avinu, when he circumcised himself, wasn't just cosmetic. It impacted on his neshama, that it allowed him, that all the impediments that did not allow him to have relevance to Torah, which is the medium to have a relation with Hashem, now were opened. That's B'chol Chosman. That's Mogen Avram. Therefore, B'chol Chosman, we conclude with you, because without you, the world would have never achieved or have any relevance to be able to achieve its purpose, which is for the sake of Torah. So I said like this. The Gemara says that before Sinai, what was circumcision? Milah without Priya. You cut the foreskin, you don't reveal the male organ. It's covered. After Sinai, if you have Milah without Priya, it's not a valid Milah. It's not valid. So the question is why? So the answer is that with this we're understanding. Before Sinai, we were not yet Odom. We were not Odom. We only became Odom at Sinai. As the Gemara tells us at the end of Shabbos, that the Zuama, the impurity, the spiritual pollution was totally vaporized at Sinai. So what Avram achieved, we were not Odom yet. So therefore, the foreskin is still a partial covering. When you remove it fully, you don't achieve that. At Sinai, when we became Odom, then now what is Milah? Milah is a full, not only is the cutting, it's uncovering. It's revealing it. It's a total removing every level of impediment. As a result of that, the Milah is not only Milah cutting, it's Milah and Priya for that reason. There's a famous, which I mentioned, there's a famous Chuvas Reb Kivega, responsa. He has a shayla that if a person, normally at a bris, who says the bracha lachnisa brisa shel Avram Avinu? The father. Because the father, the mitzvah milah is on the father, so he says the bracha, bring him within the covenant of Avram Avinu. So he has a question, what happens if the father's not at the bris, but the grandfather's at the bris? Who says the bracha lachnisa brisa shel Avram Avinu? The Moel, because he's actually doing the milah, and the obligation of milah is not on the grandfather, or maybe the grandfather, for some reason, he should say the bracha. So Rikivega rules that the grandfather should say the bracha. Why? Because the Mishnah tells us in Adorim, based on the pasuk in Yirmiyah, In low brisi yom v'loy chuk shemaim v'otzol Sunday. If the bris would not be in effect day and night, the world would not exist. So one opinion, the Mishnah is bris is milah. If the bris would not be in effect continuously, Jews would not be circumcised, the world would not exist. Another opinion says afterwards, if Torah, which is the bris, the covenant with Hashem, would not be continuously in effect, the world would revert back to pre-existence. So Rabbi Akiva Eiger says the second opinion is not disagreeing with the first opinion. If not for the bris milah, you have no relevance to Torah. Our only relevance, the same concept that the Orach Chaim HaKadosh says. And he cites a Kli Yakar, which is the oldest Ephraim, who says, when you remove the outer foreskin, you're removing the inner covering of the heart, which gives us relevance to Torah. So therefore, he says the Rambam rules in Hilchas Talmud Torah, just as a father has an obligation to teach his son Torah, a grandfather has an obligation to teach his grandson Torah. As a result of that, so Reb Akiva Eiger says, you see, there's a linkage between Milah and the teaching of Torah. So since the grandfather is obligated to teach his grandson Torah, so the mitzvah of Lachlis Bris Avram has relevance to the grandfather. Because he has the bris, only with the removal of the foreskin does he have the capacity to be taught Torah, otherwise he's totally blocked. Therefore, his conclusion is, the grandfather says the bracha Lisa Bris Avram. So he cites the levush at a bris. We say Kishem Shenichlas the bris came to Kodesh Torah Chumaisim Tovim. As the child just entered into the bris, he should enter to Torah Ulchut Masim Tovim. So he says the name of the levush is Talmud of the Ramah. Why does immediately we say, as he entered the bris, came Kodesh the Torah? Because without bris, you have no relevance to Torah. Only because the impediment was removed. Now he's able, bris, can you call it Torah? What is a consequence of removing the foreskin? Now all pathways, all channels of Kedusha have been opened. As a result of that, now he's able to enter into Torah. Therefore, we conclude, I said, Mogen Avram. If not for Avram, maybe not only because he introduced God to the world. It's more than that. We all have relevance to the objective of Torah, which is the purpose of creation, only because Avraham Avinu was able to achieve within himself that he reached a level that the circumcision would actually impact on the inner covering, which gives him relevance that ultimately his descendants would stand at Sinai to receive the Torah. We find that the Gemara tells us in Shabbos that throughout history, that any mitzvah that Klal Yisrael were Mosed Nefesh for, literally they're willing to give their lives for, that mitzvah still exists among us, and we do the mitzvah with joy. As much as a Jew is disconnected from Judaism, the two things that Jews are, firstly, they're not pagans, because the Jews always gave their lives not to become pagans. Whenever there was a decree, either worship the idol or die, Jews were willing to die. And the other mitzvah was the mitzvah of Milah. Jews always gave their lives to be circumcised, because always the Romans, the Greeks, there were all kinds of decrees not to circumcise ourselves. And Jews, they were always willing to die for those two mitzvahs. And because we were always willing to die for those two mitzvahs, therefore those mitzvahs, despite a Jew's lack of affiliation, he's not an idolater, he's not a pagan, and he's circumcised. So I asked, why idolatry? So idolatry is understandable, because idolatry, once you become a pagan, you have no relation with God any longer. But for tefillin, they didn't give their lives. For Shabbos, they didn't give their lives. But for circumcision, they did give their lives. Why? So based on what we're saying now, that's the reason. Circumcision is the gateway to the relation with God. Without that, you have no relation with Hashem. You're totally shut down. And because the Jews understood that, this is literally going for the jugular vein, the spiritual jugular vein. Once you shut that down, you have no relevance to God. Therefore, as a result of that, that's where they gave their lives. And they're willing to die to be circumcised for that reason. The famous story, Rabbi Yudah Nossi, Judah the Prince, who's the redactor of the oral law, he had a very close relationship with the Roman emperor. His name was Antoninus. And Antoninus had a palace in Eretz Yisrael, and there was an underground tunnel which connected Antoninus' palace to the palace of Rabbi Yehuda Nossi. And every day, Antoninus would come in secrecy and study Torah from Rabbi Yehuda Nossi. He would teach him Torah. And eventually, Tosfos cites Yerushalmi that Antoninus fled and he converted to Judaism. This is the Roman emperor. So Tosfos cites Yerushalmi. How did this all happen? So the Yerushalmi says that there was a decree. Rabbi Yehuda Nossi, his father was the prince. And Rabbi Yehuda Nossi, there was a decree that people were not permitted to circumcise themselves. And if you circumcise the child would be killed and the parents would be killed. So what happened? So in secrecy, Rabbi Yehuda Nossi's father had him circumcised. Word went out that the prince of Israel, his child was circumcised. So he immediately made an investigation to determine is this true or not. What happened? In the maternity ward, Rabbi Yehuda Nossi was born at the same time as Antoninus. They were born at the same time. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent Gabriel to switch the babies. So Rabbi Yehuda Nossi was given to the mother of Antoninus, and Antoninus was given to the mother of Rabbi Yehuda Nossi. So when they came to check the child was not circumcised and turned to be Antoninus. And what happened? Because Rabbi Yehuda Nossi's mother nursed him, and the milk of Rabbi Yehuda Nossi's breast touched the lips of Antoninus. That's what gave him relevance to have an interest in Judaism. And why ultimately he studied under Rabbi Yehuda Nossi and eventually converted to be a Jew. That's Tosfos in Sanhedrin. Understand? But initially there was a decree, and they were going to kill Rabbi Yehuda Nossi's father and kill him because he was circumcised. But why were they so opposed? And if you circumcise the child, the answer is because they understood. The Romans are Esau. They understood that the Kol Yaakov is only Kol Yaakov only if you're circumcised. If you're not circumcised, you have no realms to Kol Yaakov, which is Torah, and having that relation with Hashem. So the bracha of Yitzchak only has relevance only if you're circumcised. If you're not circumcised, you're totally blocked. Therefore, the decree was always circumcision. So because we gave our lives for the sake of that relation with Hashem, which is circumcision, therefore that mitzvah, despite the fact that a Jew is alienated or disconnected from God, that mitzvah always remains in place. You know, it's interesting, for the first time, I mean, it was shocking, the communists, the Russian Jews were not circumcised. Many of them were not circumcised. It was unheard of. Throughout the ages, even, we talk about the reform, in Germany, when the reform movement was in place, they were anti everything that stood for Judaism, they were against. And the reform movement, they were recognized by the government that they were the ones to determine and they would oversee anything that had to do with the Jewish people. And this is what Shimshon Hirsch, Zechat Tzadok accomplished. He was able to establish a separate community outside the Reform community. The Orthodox Jews had to pay tax to the Reform community, and they dictated. They shut down every slaughterhouse. They closed all the mikvos in the main cities. And they banned Milah. The Reform movement, they banned Milah in Frankfurt. If you were circumcised, you were sentenced to a prison term. So what did the observant Jews do? You had to go out to the country to a village, and to be circumcised under QT was not public knowledge. But if it was public knowledge, you were arrested and you were incarcerated for that. That's how the Reform initially, they wanted to uproot it totally. These are Jews to that degree. But the other Jews, and this was ultimately Rav Shimshon Hirsch's community, they circumcised themselves. And they went out of Frankfurt into the country. That's where they did shechita. That's it. They had kosher meat. But the main slaughterhouses in the country were shut down due to the Reform movement. But in Europe, in let's say in Russia and in Lithuania and Latvia, there was the Haskalah. They turned Judaism into a culture. It was cultural Judaism. They circumcised themselves because that's our identity. as a cultural people. Jews are circumcised. That was the difference between the Reform, and that's why the Reform, eventually they converted to Christianity. Within 30 years, 50% of Jews in Frankfurt, 50% converted to Christianity. The Haskalah Jews, they did not convert to Christianity. They were totally disconnected. They didn't believe in God, but they were cultural Jews. And a cultural Jew's identity, you're circumcised. You speak Yiddish. You're still connected because that's our culture. That's our culture, and they were cultural Jews. V'eschanan el Hashem. Moshe Rabbeinu says, this is the last, towards the end of his life, he says, I supplicated Hashem, Beisahi Lemar, at that moment saying, so we know that supplicating Hashem is what? Vespalel Hashem, Tvilo. Veschanan and Chinun Mchol Mokav Eloshen Matnas Chinom. Eschanan Chanun means gracious. Kel Rachum v'Chanun. God is merciful and God is gracious. What is being gracious? Rachmim means I have a reason. There's a reason why I have compassion. Chanun means it's gratis. You're totally undeserving, and despite your lack of deservingness, the benefactor is gracious to you when he provides. So the expression eschanan, when you pray to Hashem, you're coming without any level of worthiness. God owes you nothing. Nothing. And you come like a beggar with your hat in your hand. And the way it's cited in Shulchan Aruch, based on the Gemara, what is tefillah? Kriya Shema is what is declaring your belief. Kabol Solmach Shemayim. Tefillah is Omid B'fnei Melech. You're having an audience with Hashem. That's what the Amid is. And the Mechaber says, when you stand before Hashem, it's Ka'oni HaMevakesh LaPsochim. It's like a poor man seeking out alms, begging for your existence. When you go to a person to help you out, he owes you nothing. He could turn you away. You come before Hashem, he owes you nothing. I'm coming asking for the survival of my existence. He should be gracious to me. That's the way a Jew has to speak to Hashem when he prays. Without a sense of entitlement, he owes you nothing. Just to the contrary, the Gemara says in Brochos that if a person prays, and he prays well, and he feels that because he prayed so well, Hashem owes him and has to answer him, this activates a prosecution. It creates a kitruk. It activates the midas adin on that person. Because if you feel that you're worthy, and because that worthiness, God owes it to you, the moment you have that mindset, immediately it's prosecution. Why? If you feel you're so worthy, let's try to figure out why you're so special. That activates an audit on your record. And an audit on a person's record, chas v'shalom, that's a midas adin. So therefore, when you stand before Hashem, you're coming, you have no entitlement, you're purely asking Hashem to be gracious to you. No entitlement. He owes you nothing. That's Chanan, as Rashi says, Elamatnas Chinam. I'm coming to receive something gratis, purely gratis. I'm unworthy, undeserving. It's purely your graciousness. Why are you giving it to me? Api sheishlu mitzadikim litlos b'maseim hatovim. Although a tzaddik, like Moshe Rabbeinu, he's able to come in terms of what he's done. If not Moshe Rabbeinu, there wouldn't have been a Torah given to Klal Yisrael. He was the only one who was qualified to be the conduit and represent Klal Yisrael. Even him, as great as he was, he's coming and he could attribute it to his what he accomplished. He's coming and asking Hashem gratis, be gracious. Why? Where do we find this? We find that after Chet Egel, Hashem says, I will be gracious when I am gracious. Therefore, when he supplicated Hashem was chinun, I'm asking you to be able to go into there so purely based on your graciousness. I'm unworthy, regardless of what I've accomplished. Now, a person who, if you just think for a moment in terms of what God provides for you, even if let's say you're born with a advanced level of intellect and you're healthy and you have ability, everything you have is an endowment of Hashem. You're endowed. So if you're endowed and God maintains that endowment, your health, your wealth, your existence, your function, and if you go through the Chovos HaLevavos, in terms of the level of gratitude and holiness we have for Hashem, because unless He provides every aspect of our function, we'd be less than a vegetable. And yet we function very well. So what do we, that are we fully invested? There's no perfect tzaddik. So we're lagging, and despite that we're lagging, He still provides everything and beyond. So what does God owe us? He owes you nothing. As much as you do, He doesn't owe you anything. The Medrash tells us there's a mitzvah to circumcise your child. So the Medrash says, if Hashem wouldn't give you a child, could you circumcise your child? You couldn't circumcise your child. So Hashem creates the opportunity for you to be able to do the mitzvah. And He gives you the interest to do the mitzvah. If Hashem wouldn't give you the house and the means to build the house and put a parapet on the roof, could you build the house to be able to fill the mitzvah of a parapet? So everything we do, every context of anything, it's because Hashem provides everything. So if that's the case, God owes it to you. Therefore, everything is veschanam. Therefore, tzaddikim, even when they pray, they never attribute it to their masim tovim, to their good deeds, ever. Because we're always way behind the 8 ball. Where debt is beyond debt. We could never pull ourselves out of that debt. Therefore, tzaddik, when he prays, it's veschanam. It's a loshen matnas chinam. God is gracious. Dover acher, yesh echad me'asor l'shonos. Ze shenikreis tefillah kedis b'sifri. The 10 expressions of tefillah. Chanun is one of the expressions of tefillah. Espalel. It's the that we find by what's his name, by Yaakov, by Har Moriah. He realized he went to sleep. That's when he had the dream. The angels ascend, descend. That's Vayifka Bamokum. Right at the beginning over there. So Yetar says it's like, what's the Yetar? So Gemara says in Sukkah, it's like a pitchfork. Pitchfork turns things upside down. It was Mahapich Midas HaDin to Midas HaRachmin. That's Vayetar. But Rashi says the Sifri, the 10 expressions of Tefillah. There's a Yalkut that says the 13 expressions of Tefillah, not 10, 13. Now, the Rambam in Hilchos Tefillah writes, what was the original language? First of all, why is Hebrew called Lashon HaKodesh? Why is it called the Holy Tongue? So the Ramban writes in its introduction to Chumash, is because it's God's language and the world was created with Lashon HaKodesh. That's what's called the Holy Tongue, Hebrew. It's God's language. And initially, according to Rambam, the obligation of tefillah is a doraisa. What's avodah shebelev tefillah? So initially, during Bayis Rishon, when a person would pray, there was no uniform language that you prayed. Everybody had his own language. Whatever your request was, you used your own words. When the Jews came back from Bavel, the Anshe Knesset Gedola, they authored a uniform text that all Jews, when you say the Amida, everybody says the same words. And if you don't use those words, one is not Yotzei Tefillah, meaning if you do it in Hebrew. And you have to say words which represent those words. But if it's Hebrew, it's their Hebrew words. Why? So he explains, the Rambam, that what is God's language? God's language is Hebrew. Before we went into exile, Golus Bavel, every Jew, the Hebrew he spoke was pure Hebrew. When we went to Bavel, we were exposed to other languages. We were exposed to Persian. We were exposed to Babylonian. So many words became integrated, intermingled in the Hebrew language. So we were no longer speaking pure Hebrew. So here you have an audience with Hashem, and the language you speak is not a pure Hebrew. Because of that, the effectiveness of the tefillah is not going to be the same. So therefore, Anshe Knesset Gedola, they authored a uniform text in pure Hebrew that every Jew, when he prays, when you pray in Hashem's language, it's exactly as it's supposed to be expressed. That's the understanding. So to get the ultimate return on your audience, you have to speak his language. There are 13 expressions of tefillah. And we say this always. We always find the number 13 resurfacing. 13 is echod, numerically echod. When you speak, when you supplicate Hashem, there are 13 approaches. Because if you want to have a relation with echod, which is 13, there are 13 pathways to be able to speak to him. That's why the expression, not 10 expressions, but the 13 expressions of tefillah. Rashi says the Sifri to 10. What is 10? 10 is Asar Maimoros, Esesphiros. That all the channels between Hashem and the world, they're Esesphiros. And that's Asar Maimoros Nivra Olam. It's 10. Everything came about through 10. Therefore, the relationship with him is within the context of 10 for that reason.
Rabbi.